Hi, and welcome to Auto Insider, a podcast from Automobility Limited. I'm Bill Russo, founder and CEO of Automobility, strategy and investment advisory firm based in Shanghai. Since 2017, we've been helping companies navigate the disruptive forces shaping mobility, from electrification and connectivity to intelligence, autonomy, and new business models, with China at the epicenter of these transformations. Auto Insider brings you conversations with the leaders building the next generation of mobility systems at global scale. Today's episode explores a structural shift in the automotive value chain, from traditional Tier-1 supply relationships to system-level architecture leadership. And we examine how that transformation is unfolding at China speed, with global implications. And if you enjoy stories like this, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Auto Insider on this platform so you'll be notified of future conversations. Let me tell you about today's guest. Today, we're joined by my friend, Dr. Simon Yang, President of China and Asia Pacific at Aptiv. Simon has spent nearly 3 decades across the global automotive value chain, starting at General Motors in the United States, helping build Delphi's China business from the ground up, and now leading Aptiv's regional strategy at the intersection of electrification, EE architecture, software-defined vehicles, and intelligent mobility. Under Simon's leadership, Aptiv has evolved from a traditional Tier-1 supplier into a systems architect and integration partner, supporting both global OEMs and a new generation of Chinese automakers. Simon, welcome to Auto Insider.
Thank you, Bill. Glad to be here.
Very nice. Let's start with a bit of background on your career journey. Before we get into talking about the business, I'd like to get people to know a little bit about the backgrounds of the people that I'm speaking with. And we've known each other for many years. And Simon, you've had a front row seat to China's automotive transformation. I mean, a lot's happened over the last several decades. And for 3 decades, you've been right there in the front row. Let's start with that journey. What were the key experiences, your highlights?
Yeah, Bill, as you point out, right, in the last 3 decades, I've been in the industry. I feel my career almost reflect the evolution of this great industry. From early days, I joined as an employee of General Motors. Then when vertical integration become a cost liability, so General Motors spin off Delphi, I become part of Delphi. Then with the new transformation, Delphi become today's Aptiv. Then I become the employee of Aptiv. The several highlights I want to mention, because the industry have been changing from the early days, vertical integrated traditional manufacturer company to today's innovation driving technology companies. So my career, when I look back, a couple of points need remind me what changes has been, what impact to a personal journey. Yeah, the first one I want to mention here is 2005. I went to bankruptcy, because the traditional way the company was structured, the products was developed, the strategy we had was not matching the transformation. So that was a big impact for me to learn, well, the world is changing. So if the company does not change, or a person does not change, then what you see is a rapid decline of profitability of the market share. Then when the new Delphi come out from bankruptcy, you see the company is starting a new strategy. Like I said, where the market is going. So we defined a new strategy. So I was part of the transformation team. I see a huge change to me personally. Nowadays, I would say another change is coming. How the global tier companies, especially we're facing the situation in China, how a leader should change in the new environment. There's another point I want to mention, that because Aptiv went through from a large Tier-1 supplier to diverse quite a bit of business, which is not in our core strategy. So during that time frame, as a leader, how are you going to not only be part of the execution, how do you become a part of the strategy discussion? So that's the big impact to my career. I would say my career almost reflected the industry evolution.
Yeah, that's great. I think putting yourself in the changes that have happened around the company and how you've navigated through that and transformed both personally and professionally is important, because this is a market, especially here in China, that changes so rapidly that people have to be prepared to retool themselves, retool the company, and reposition as things shift so rapidly. Let's talk about how much change for those of us who've been in China for a long time. Myself, 22 years now. When you go back several decades and you compare China when you first arrived with the China we live in today, what has fundamentally changed? And not just in scale, but in mindset.
Bill, you mentioned a very critical point. What China has been and has changed is the mindset. So the scale is there. China is the largest, automotive market. It's the largest automotive producer globally. So that's a skill. But more importantly, the mindset change in 3 decades. We were just getting here. China was in the mind of, I open the market. I'm going to using the market exchange for technologies. I am the follower. And a lot of times we're trying to just basically duplicate what the global OEMs, global tier ones, had been doing for many years successfully. And they did not have a mindset to innovate, to lead the fundamental change we see today compared to 3 decades ago. Chinese local OEMs, including global tiers here, local tiers here, now they're not only looking to producing products in China, they are innovating. And they are actually setting up a strategy to become the leader. So this is one fundamental change I think we have to recognize. They were happy to be a follower, was trying to duplicate what had been successful in some other place, become an innovator, become a leader.
And the world wasn't really bargaining for that when it came to China. I think the global automotive industry came to China because of the size and growth opportunity. The expectation was that China would basically be a place to make and sell products. The Chinese companies were certainly intending to compete, but I think we underestimated many global companies. Kind of convince your company that it isn't the same place and have to make adjustments, I think is critical for the success going forward. But maybe to be a little bit more granular from your perspective, how has China changed the rules of the global automotive game?
Bill, what's worth to mention here is I think outside China, we're kind of recognizing the changes, but we're still underestimating the China situation. Now, in regarding to how China has been changing the granular level, I think, first of all, they started forming a strategy, right? They had a strategy. For example, electrification. That strategy is not only a technology strategy, it's part of national energy strategy. But actually, if you look from a strategy standpoint, they already went beyond that. The second piece is 3 decades ago, they only worry about what to do here. But part of the strategy now is they are looking to expand globally.
Yeah, it's no longer thinking about China just for China. It's what are you doing in China and how is it going to affect your business globally? Because China's not going to stay in China. Unlike Las Vegas, what happens in China will not stay in China. So let's talk a little bit about, and I provisionally thought that the topic today is how to transform a business from a traditional way of thinking about it, a tier one in the case of automotive suppliers. And as you said, when we first came to China, these suppliers were just manufacturers of components. They were not tier one, integrators. But in observing the transformation at your company, again, being a Delphi, the people who don't know Delphi, it was pretty much a captive GM business, was spun off, became a tier one for many automotive companies, and then Aptiv became a technology spinoff of Delphi. Kind of simplifying it, but I think that's kind of the evolution of the supply chain role that has happened, not only for Aptiv, but for many global automotive suppliers. But when we think back to several decades, China didn't have these types of companies. They do now. I think Automotive News put 15 of the top 100 automotive part suppliers were Chinese companies. In 2010, the number was zero. That's how quickly things have changed. So we thought of the topic for today is the transformation from Tier-1 to systems architect, Aptiv operating in China at China speed with global scale. So let's talk about it. Aptiv. Aptiv's evolution in China has clearly moved from beyond traditional localization. Once upon a time, we came to China, we brought what we had on the global shelf and we made it in China. It's the business for many companies even today, but not necessarily for all. How has Aptiv China's strategy changed over the past, say, decade, say the last 10 years?
I want to talk about that in two portions, right? The first portion is, I think today is what we see what Aptiv is doing in China and how we get here is directly related with Aptiv's global strategy. Because when, we were transforming the company from Delphi, we talk about GM to Delphi. I'm talking about from Delphi to Aptiv, right? At that point, 2015, we already clearly see this industry is moving into safe, green, and connectivity. Safe, green, and connected. This is what we have been focused on. So then when we talk about 2015, when the EV penetration rate is not as high as today. Now, when the world is moving that way, obviously China is a part of that. China was becoming the largest producer, largest market. And also, importantly, we see the trend of China driving the electrification. China was driving electrification, but not connectivity. But we already view where the market is moving. So I would say this is why, from that point of time, Aptiv is starting thinking how we will be part of this, transformation, the trend. So we made a lot of decisions how do we run our business in China. In China, I would say how we specifically Aptiv China has been transforming. As you mentioned, in the early days, we produce this stuff here. So we have a large company for several sectors of product lines, right? We have powertrain, we have air conditioning, you name it. We have body. Then we decided, we say, hey, anything not related with our strategy, which is safe, we talk about ADAS today, right? We talk about sooner controllers that were not related with green, which electrification or connectivity. So we started diverse our other sector of our own business, and we focus on those three things. In China, we went through, I will use the word global for China, which means we already, when the business outside China was leading by the global JVs. So our largest customer, Volkswagen, General Motors. So those are Ford and a lot of European. So we basically produce global for China. I was not specifically saying we'll do that, but we fully understand we need a China for China strategy. This is where we started driving China for China strategy. One of the core transformation we did is localization. The localization is not only, the part design. This is where Aptiv went probably a little ahead of our friends. In the industry, the full supply chain development in China for China. So we openly talk about that in all occasions. Then when we see the trend starting, China start leading on the electrification. China now is leading on the safety, leading on the connectivity. So we transferred our in China for China strategy to in China for global. I think today what Aptiv is doing in China is not only this type of China for global. I almost want to change that to global for global. What I mean is, when we have opportunity outside China, we need a developing technology. We use China developing that products, that technology in China, sometimes not selling in China for our business outside China. I said this is where we transform from global for China, China for China, early version China for global, mainly for competitive standpoint, now to today's, I will call global for global transformation.
Yeah, and I think what you're defining is sort of the stages of evolution of sort of a mindset shift of a global supplier. Global meaning did not start here. Global from China means you're global when you're in China. You're not bringing something from the rest of the world to China. As you said, China has taken the lead in certain fields. And if that's the case, then you can't rely purely on a outside China R&D to be able to innovate at the speed at which those particular domains are accelerating. If China's the biggest market, not only for EVs, but of connectivity, of intelligent connected vehicles, then increasingly the global development has to evolve toward working closely with those companies who are the benchmarks, the leaders in those fields. And that's increasingly going to be local players. So thinking of the shift, tier one being sort of a planet within a solar system defined by a global OEM, whether that was General Motors, Volkswagen, or whomever, that solar system was not from China. Now we're evolving toward being a technology partner and an architecture partner, not just a tier one supplier, but a development partner for a new set of automotive players that increasingly are going to be based here in China. Is that a fair description?
Yes, Bill. Exactly what you're talking about here. I think another thing is the products. We talk about market, but I think the product itself has been changed because traditional, point-to-point transportation tool become today's mobility. The vehicle is really a mobility carrier, right? It is a mobility carrier with connectivity. That driving a lot of things we're talking about here at the same time. The product itself is changing, and China, from some perspective, is the first adopter of those new mobility products. Then the ecosystem last 3 decades has been built up in China. Enable you do the innovation here. Another factor is the maturity of the ecosystem, obviously changing the landscape of competition. So the competition also forced us to be faster, leaner, more cost effective.
Yeah, and you used a few words there that I don't think are common in the vernacular of the global auto industry yet. It should be. Ecosystem, the mindset of I build together with partners a solution that requires a set of features that we have not had up until now in solving the mobility problem. And I think that's challenging the traditional mindset of the automotive paradigm of the 20th century, right? The automotive paradigm of the car looks, feels, is centered on a certain set of characteristics that are more aimed at the driving experience. China is really challenging that as we observed it, right? I think the rest of the world's view of China is it electrified the powertrain and they're ahead in that. Yes, they did, but that's not the extent of the transformation that's happening as we've witnessed it. It's really thinking of the car more as a mobility smart platform, part of the transformation of transportation, not just of the automobile, but how people and goods are being transported with a mindset toward a different energy footprint and a different set of connectivity features that enable the communication between the car and the infrastructure. And the user experience becomes a priority because the car in its transformation is becoming more self-actuating, more of an AI, robotic, autonomous machine. All of what I've kind of described and what you've articulated. What extent does China now, not just having caught up, but having taken the lead, what extent does China influence Aptiv's global technology and product roadmap?
Yes, Bill, you just emphasized the concept of connected smart mobility platform versus traditional automobile, right? So that actually forced the change from traditional relationship of you become tier one, the OEMs just integrate stuff, to today's smart mobility vehicle require the partnership differently. User experience, you mentioned, even the autonomous driving, the traditional relationship actually is not going to resolve those issues with the speed we require. Also, maybe if we have enough time, we can still do, you developing some stuff, later on we integrate for different OEMs, but now the time is not even allow us to do that, right? So the new partnership, how to developing products definitely needs to be changed. From Aptiv standpoint, we look at that, right? Well, we talk about powertrain transformation. Electrification is a part of it. Actually, as you mentioned here, outside world probably view electrification too much as a part of China transformation. They think where China get today is because the powertrain changed. Yes, it is, But because of that, right, definitely our electrification product portfolio, for example, the first adoption market is here. In a lot of cases, the first application was raised here in China. We talk about emergency door lock openings. Those when the vehicle totally lost power, right? How to resolve that? In the traditional automobile, you worry about those stuff, but it's in a different scale because when people change, for example, the handle of the car right now is all sucked in, so they face the different issue when the powertrain is electrified, right? So we put resources, capability, capital in China to developing those products with our global customers outside China. The second, when we talk about connectivity and safety related stuff, you remember the debate about L2, L2++, L3, or if you look what is on the road in China right now is end-to-end autonomous driving vehicle. So those type of technology, if you do not develop in here with the data they can generate in a short period of time, with the mindset they can do it with affordable cost. Definitely, we look at the front end is here, we're developing here. Actually, it's beneficial for us to try to do it outside China. With the geopolitical tensions, for example, you do get barriers now, right? Data you cannot share. Some products, even fundamental semiconductors, you may not be able to share. Those type of stuff, Aptiv made a decision. We will, do it here because the market is here, right? We can do it here. That actually helping us to serve our customer globally. We maybe talk about another portion, later on is about exporting.
Yeah, I think you triggered a few other points, but I want to come back to something you said earlier. You described Aptiv's approach as evolving from in China for China to now in China for the world. What does that mean operationally? In R&D and architecture design and validation, in OEM collaboration? How does China's speed of iteration and software intensity change the way Aptiv develops software-defined vehicles solutions?
First of all, we when we talk about transformation, we talk a little bit about traditional Tier-1 supplier. We're making stuff to a system integrator, right? This the transformation we talk about it. Now, specifically on this end, right, with geopolitical tensions, different ecosystems are forming. So what we are doing in China, we have to keep in mind. For example, the software stack we're developing here, does that providing the system support for an OEM? Now, the system support for OEM actually is different in the different regions because outside China, for example, global OEs, they have very strong, very regulated, I would say, very disciplined system in-house. How to work with them is a little bit different than how we work in China to providing the system support. China very fast. The OEM system here, I would say the flexibility is much more than we see with our traditional important customers. So when we do the system developing here, we keep in mind, we say, okay, so we got to do what we need to do within the boundary. Can our supplier system providing the support to do what our OEMs do in here to integrate the system for them? At the same time, we keep that in mind is that when that system goes overseas, two ways. One is when the Chinese local OEs bring the products we're developing together in China to overseas. Actually, there is a different requirement you have to deal with. Regulation. I talk about functional safety as an example. The requirement is different. Regulation is different. So when we support our system as a system integrator in China, we keep that in mind. The second one is a lot of products that have products are first innovated here, but how we convince our traditional important strategic partners outside China to integrate that into their system without the data be transferred between the countries or continent. So that is where we put a lot of attention internally in our organization, because if you just use the global footprint we have right now to supporting those transformations, it won't work because our outside China's organization is running a different model. So how to change that? I think Aptiv, did a lot of internal reflections, how we support. A simple example is how do you answer the WeChat requirements coming in the weekend when you're supporting the operations in Europe? Things like that is what Aptiv, I think, we are thinking about how to be a China for global players.
Yeah. And there are things that happen faster here. You mentioned earlier that the commercialization of these, say, 21st century innovations, the electrification, not only powertrain electrification, the energy strategy that drove it, the policy guidance that encouraged the investments and the de-risking, the investment in infrastructure needed to give purchase consideration, consumer confidence that EVs can be used every day. But adding the smartness and the connectivity features, the consumer expectations have shifted toward more software-defined vehicle architecture. That if you're lacking features that are aimed at in-cabin experience, unlocking a different type of a user experience, then you're probably not going to be on the purchase consideration list. It's kind of like when the dumb phone turned into a smartphone. They were still able to make phone calls, but the smartphone did a whole lot more. It plugged into a whole different lifestyle expectation. And I think that's what many of the Chinese companies have demonstrated, the ability to innovate, backed by policy. The thing that I've always felt about what happens in China and why it moves so quickly is there's a policy guidance toward a different outcome than the way regulations are actually trying to take the same outcome that we've always made, but make sure that you protect the consumer, right? That you don't expose them to risk. In China, it's a little different, right? Policy is to innovate and to experiment and to de-risk, the encouragement of companies to actually take the plunge and experiment with these new architectures. And there's a tremendous transformation that happens in both the electronics architecture, in the way the car is designed as a cross-domain computing device, and all of the integration challenges associated with bringing these new technologies into a chassis, into a vehicle that has to pass certain standards for crashworthiness and safety. That's the domain that I think Aptiv has been able to demonstrate relevancy in China. So what are the implications of what you've learned from having navigated that on how you manage the global business?
First of all, let me talk about practically how we made major changes compared to our traditional structure. Then we can talk about, how we get here and why we get here, right? Traditionally, a lot of global tier-1 suppliers, our friends here, were the same. Product driving globally, matrix structure. A lot of companies are still doing that. Product line, business unit, then matrix structure in China. At that point, we found out several things were changing very rapidly in China. People always thinking China because the government incentives and industry, policy made this. They were major part of it. But what we view is exactly what you mentioned, because the mindset is different. The regulations here tend to be like, okay, we just want to make sure innovation doesn't get out of control, rather than totally from different end is like, we will protect, which we need to. And China's regulation actually enable innovation, but they want to make sure you stay in the space, you do not hurt people. With that, obviously, we as a company, rather than we continuously repeating the same thing we've been doing for many years. For example, you developing products, validating to extend, right? Then become like here, they providing a working relationship with OEM together, try something new at the same time. You make sure that is safe and connected. Okay. So obviously, in order to do that, your organization has to be able to react, to make decisions in China, rather than globally. The product line decision is that this thing has to be covered in all the continents. Here, we need to try something new. At the same time, you need a flexibility. It's like, because a lot of times the approved supplier for certain tier ones globally, to get on that list, it takes time. But in China, there's a lot of sense we're trying new here. You need a new supplier. Because in the new ecosystem, even the semiconductors we talk about, in crisis, you need different suppliers to come in to support you for this innovation, for this transformation. So this way, we made a decision, not only China as an independent business reporting to CEO, you make a decision. At the same time, I think it's not only the front end or the customer and the product development end. One of the most important elements of it is the supply chain management. We made that also independent and break the traditional matrix structure. Otherwise, we won't be able to experience what we can do with our customer here.
Yes, I think as this industry has moved toward a different product architecture, an intelligent, connected vehicle, software, the rest of the world calls it software-defined vehicles. They call it intelligent connected vehicles in China. I think that's a profound difference, by the way. Software-defined means you're only thinking about adding a new layer of intelligence to the car, but you're still thinking about it purely as a standalone computer, as opposed to a network device. In China, the vehicle's connections to the world matter, right? Not just because of the digital services and the mobility services that flow through the mobility device, the car, the vehicle. I should stop calling it a car because it actually doesn't have to be a car. It could be a delivery device. It could be a scooter. It could be a VTOL. Mobility is the problem solving that we should be thinking about. But the idea that the vehicle is part of this network of mobility solutions. In China, I've heard it described as a sort of an ecosystem. You used the word earlier, ecosystems. And this evolution of the supply chain toward a new role for the supplier to be the integrator, what I and others have called Tier-5 instead of Tier-1, where the Tier-1 works for the OEM and the OEM decides the product configuration. In this world where it isn't just about hardware, it's about chips, software, integration of the solution to the internet services, to the outside connectivity services. We're seeing a shift toward what is becoming more of a role of what we can call a Tier-5 supplier. That's probably better known to the customer than a traditional parts supplier would be. Companies in that role operate across hardware, software, systems and solutions integration at, you used the word earlier, and at an ecosystem level. How does Aptiv play or interpret its role in this type of a structural shift? And importantly, how do you then decide when to build it yourself internally, either in China, I think increasingly in China because it's moving faster, but to build it internally versus when to partner and when to invest? Because I know you've made some strategic investments in building your ecosystem in China.
Yeah, so Bill, the key point is I think China is doing software-defined intelligent mobility platform. So I'm glad you talk about, outside we still talk about software-defined, but it is in a different mindset because this is a software-defined intelligent mobility transformation tool platform. In order to do that, traditionally, the Tier-1 and OEM, this is why a lot of discussions I think going on for a while is where the Tier-1 stay, what are we going to do? Because now, for a while, even the discussion today is OEM is going to vertical integrate everything. Your supplier base is going to go. Sometimes I'm joking around, I say, Aptiv is the product of de-integrated in-house. We are the products of US tried a fully integrated model in 80s. So for Aptiv, right, we see in the new ecosystem to support this software-defined intelligent vehicle. So where we need to be in the new ecosystem, this is what our strategy. We say we still go back to the fundamentals. Okay, is this related with connectivity? Is this related with green? Is this related with safety? If that is, then in the new ecosystem, where we can provide value. So we do see, for example, user experience, smart cockpit, instrumental, those stuff, because the OEMs right now is dealing with, they need to certify a new generation of consumers. They can do stuff connected inside the vehicle. From that portion, originally, they outsourcing everything, you instrument gauges to the Tier-1s. That model doesn't work anymore because they need to integrate what end customer have to have to what the Tier-1 has to do. A lot of stuff looks like they are moving in-house. It's not because they want to move in-house, because the new nature of the products require them to do that. From that application level, end customer application level, they will do that in-house. Aptiv, that situation, what do you do? So we providing fundamental, I will use, for example, the middleware. So we're providing the platform from software standpoint to providing a platform they can integrate upper level for end customer experience. This is why, as you mentioned, we acquired a software company, Wind River, because Wind River providing a middleware operating system, can providing the platform, the container, the hypervisors, which we can integrate not only our products, other products into the platform OEM wants to have, right? Then, in order to do that, we're providing that service with our traditional strong point of super competitive manufacturing capability and cost-effective solutions. So this is where in the ecosystem we have. You can go 0.5, but a lot of players are 0.5 right now. I mean, if you look Huawei, is that tier 1? Is OEM. They don't make cars yet, right? So
well, they kind of
I
do.
think the new,
Yeah, they kind of the Ito brand, made by a company called Series, but it's pretty much to the standard defined by our, Luxseed that Chery makes. If you look at those two types of cars, they have a lot of the same technology. Huawei is actually exercising its role as a software, middleware, and hardware player to exert, I think, a controlling force on the local partners. That's obviously not the case in the way the world outside of China works. But when you've got companies like Huawei that are representing a new way of thinking, they are reshaping expectations about intelligent systems architecture and software and hardware integration. So looking ahead, what capabilities are going to define who you bring in as partners in building your intelligent vehicle ecosystem? I assume Huawei becomes a competitor now to you, but it also really reshapes the expectations of the consumer. What are the gaps that you mentioned, Wind River, in providing sort of a cross-domain computing, a software architecture capability that marries very well with your middleware architecture, with your EE architecture? You have any other examples of how you're building your ecosystem?
Yeah, so let's talk about the safety portion of it right now. Let's talk about ADAS. So how do we do ADAS right now? There is OEMs, they will fully developing from semiconductor standpoint to full stack software, right? Their own system. But to do that, where Aptiv is doing right now, we can be the full system integrator. We have software capability, sensing capability, most importantly, the hardware integration capability. We got to make sure we have the full capability to providing the full system for our customer. But on the other hand, some customer, even the ones you mentioned, they're providing the whole system, but they are still one of our customers because for hardware integration, in even those models, because they have the software stack developed by themselves, we will providing the system integration with our sensing, our radar, our system to support their full stack. In a lot of other cases, OEM nowadays there is a trend here. There was a trend a couple of years ago, do everything vertically, and then they found out, with their own model, with their volume they have, it's very difficult to justify the investment and the manpower they can do with the only platform they support. They can justify that investment. Then at that point, actually, Aptiv is providing platform, cross customer base with our supply chain buying power, right? We're providing a much more competitive solution, a full stack solution. Obviously, full stack, you still need to adapt to different OEMs requirements. So we're providing service for that. To answer your question, our business model in China actually evolved, watching the 0.5 trend moving where we can provide value in the new ecosystem. We go that way. But we build the whole from software to hardware capability, system capability here in China to serve different customer requirements.
And you've also made local investments. You took equity in MaxiEye, which provides camera, radar, fusion algorithms, and that helps you build a localized capability set around the ADAS and AV stack. Is Maybe you can describe the rationale for that. And is that an example of how China now is becoming an innovation hub for the global system within Aptiv?
Yeah, this is part of I would say, the global system we're developing. We're developing the same thing outside China, in other cases, actually internally. So the reason we have those investments in China, as I said, because in areas, I use MaxI investment as an example, their software stack is specifically developing for a specific situation in China, starting with local SoC, the local software stack, and specifically serve specific customer, they have those requirements. Obviously, we already have this stuff here. So globally, outside China, for example, we have different requirements, different customer, then we can adopt that quickly, then serve our global customers with what we have developing here. At the same time, you can see for exporting vehicles of Chinese local OEMs, sometimes inside China, we use one full system, but go outside China because different data requirement, different functional safety requirement. That portion of the software will use a different integrator outside China for that. China is developing an ecosystem. Geopolitically, they have to be able to survive. And outside China, we require different things because there are national security concerns, there's data concerns. We have to certify that too. So how to do that? You have to have a different model, But overall, to answer your question, Bill, we do a lot of things here ahead of time because the market is driving.
Yep. The pace and the speed. And as China goes global, we had 7.1 million exports made in China vehicles, and Chinese companies are investing now in building overseas capacities as well, which doesn't even count in that 7.1 million number. So yes, China makes about a third of all the cars in the world. So yes, scale, speed, and global reach is increasingly the trend. So being able to, as a global tier one, leverage your footprint as a global company and being able to adapt to the local requirements as Chinese companies go global, I would imagine that's going to be an opportunity for Aptiv to build stronger relationships with those companies because they're going to need to enter the markets with the knowledge and experience that you have in being able to engineer the solutions for the local requirements. Do you see it as an opportunity? Because I think a lot of people look at China going global as a threat. Do you see it as an opportunity to gain business with Chinese companies?
Actually, our recent earnings call, we had another investor event in New York. We talked about that. Aptiv view that is one of our growth driver. Not only is opportunity, we think this is a growth driver. The reason you mentioned it here, right? The exporting is going to grow. At the same time, Chinese localization outside China will happen very fast. The competition here in China for global tier ones like Aptiv, with our traditional strong customer base, actually losing market share in China. The competition getting stronger every day. So how we view that is not only our growth driver, and also can we continuously to be profitably growing in China? This is one of critical fundamental issues we have to resolve. So we see that is a growth driver. The reason also is the current global tier ones, I think, feel threatened by the locals, but they probably feel more comfortable when they see the trend of Chinese local OEMs going outside China. They're exporting outside China. I think we got to be careful when global tier ones think that is an advantage. Yes, it is a global footprint, definitely an advantage, because the Chinese local suppliers will take time to what we have been doing there in the last 3 decades. We try to learn how to do business in China. They're going to try to learn how to do business outside China. The global tier ones is what we view Aptiv. We have to change quickly. Look, we do have an advantage. We do see this as a growth driver, but if we do not adapt to a new requirement, when you talk about a solar system, we have to first recognize the exporting, the localized Chinese vehicle, the solar system, the sun is here. So your current global setup may not be able to fit in that new solar setup. So this is where I think we kind of view, we have to change our side.
It's an opportunity if you've recognized that the capability sets in China have evolved in areas where they have needs that you have to upgrade your capabilities to serve those needs. In particular, in the intelligent connected vehicle architecture and in the AI full stack ADAS AV technology domain. But if we do that, our global footprint becomes a compounding effect that as the Chinese companies go global, we can serve the global companies. We can serve them as they become global. But you also pointed out that there's a risk. The risk is if we do nothing, the Chinese supply chain will evolve to fill that gap. And you will have global competition emanating from China, not just as OEMs, right? That's what the OEMs are fearing right now, is that Chinese car makers will go global. Over time, the suppliers will also, but it's going to take longer because they don't have all the local understanding, knowledge, capability sets that we currently have. So it's an opportunity if we act. If we do nothing, we'll breed the next generation of 0.5 competition as global players.
You articulate very clearly. You summarized much better than what I was.
No, I got it. You guys have taught me this very, very well. Let me look ahead now. Let's as we look the next 3 to 5 years forward. What are Aptiv's key priorities in China and Asia Pacific? And how do you see the balance evolving between hardware, software, and AI, since that's the big domain of highest interest in the future vehicle architectures? And take even broader, what capabilities will determine which companies remain relevant as system complexity continues to increase?
From Aptiv, right? First of all, this is why we are continuously investing in China. We view that is opportunity. China will continue to be the largest, vehicle producer and be the largest exporter of the vehicles. And China is leading at smart software-defined smart vehicles, right? And software-defined mobility platforms. We'll continue investing here because we do see opportunities and profit growth in China, obviously by driving our innovation capability here, which means investment, which means the local decision making. We enable them with our global support, right? This is our strategy. It's a growing market. It's an opportunity for us. We continue to invest. We continue to grow our capability here. At the same time, we have to be an agile company, be able to work with the local OEMs as their partner, because the system provider is not located there. So as a partner, you're going to see we partner with the local suppliers, local OEMs, semiconductor partners in China. So this is where we see how to be successful in this growing market. Secondly, when you mention something specific, for example, AI. Globally, we have our AI strategy, but in China, actually, what the trend we're doing right now is the application adoption become a little bit faster and easier here. First of all, there's a less burden of regulations. You see the encouragement from the government, plus the encouragement from consumers. Because right now, we're talking about how to use your current computing power to add AI into the current platforms, current EU architecture. China already started. So this is where we view, we have our global AI strategy. In China, you're going to see that in Beijing Auto Show, from design process to manufacture process, AI adoption, how we do that in China is ahead of our global adoption, because the environment of the market here is enable us to do that. We're still developing stuff outside. What we're saying is we'll continue to invest in China. We continue to change our global structure to be ready when the Chinese growing outside of China. We continue to be partner with local OEMs, local strategic partners in China to really stay in the new ecosystem, providing value and grow.
And you and I spoke to some of the government representatives as well, and this is the message that we've tried to convey, is that by participating in the Chinese market as American companies, as businesses, we operate at a problem-solving level for accelerating our own technical development. That's so important to the global auto industry right now. That is, as we tend to fragment things and regionalize the business, the clock speeds are different. The pace of innovation, the accelerating force of not only of the scale of the market, but of the experimental mindset that exists within a market that encourages and challenges the traditional automotive paradigms. We need that. We need that accelerating force because it helps upgrade the capability set, not just for the Chinese companies that we serve, which we should, for the global companies that we serve as well, right? Our ability to innovate at China's speed upgrades our ability to do the R&D in critical domains that are relevant to the global customers that we serve as well. And I think that's an important note to kind of end on, Simon, is basically let's stop putting geopolitics in as a reason to not embrace a collaborative build ecosystem mindset. Because if I've learned anything in my time here, ecosystems are what ultimately determine success and failure of companies. The ability to collaborate and partner across industry lines, across business lines. And the car industry is not just about Detroit anymore. It's Silicon Valley, Detroit. It's the innovation centers of the world that need to bring the mindset of problem solving to a traditional industry that's been around for a long time, but is going through technology disruption. So Simon, thank you for sharing your perspective on how Aptiv is evolving from this traditional tier one supplier to a systems architect, operating at China speed while scaling globally. This conversation highlights how the automotive value chain is being redefined, not only by new technologies, but by new organizational models and ecosystem dynamics. To our audience, if you've enjoyed this episode, please like, share, and subscribe to Auto Insider on your preferred platform. We're on YouTube, we're on Apple Podcasts, we're on Spotify, we're on Yoku for those who are watching in China. Until next time, I'm Bill Russo. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for listening. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you.